Good afternoon, and welcome back to Red Newt for our Wine Talk Thursday, April 2nd. Today, it's all about Tango. We have a few people joining us. Meg's here would be to my right. Meg's Goodwin, our assistant winemaker. Kelby Russell, our winemaker. Heather O'Grady Evans, our events manager and the brain behind our social media programs this year. And Rebecca, who is our brand manager and who you see all over the place. So let's get going. And remember, Heather's watching like a hawk the feed with the video. So if you have questions, just type them on in and we'll try and get to them. So great. Today's vineyard is Tango Oaks Vineyard. And this is a vineyard just maybe a half mile from Red Newt. It's owned by Fred Wickham. And ironically, or really interestingly, Fred was part of the Wickham family who built the building where Red Newt Cellars is today back about almost 40 years ago. So he's kind of part of the family, or we've become part of the Wickham legacy. So yeah, with that, let's talk about some wine. Let's taste some wine. How's that? That's a good start.
Let's taste wine.
Okay, I think we're back. Sorry about that, folks. Another technical glitch. I think maybe everybody and their brother and sister and uncle and aunt and grandmother and grandson and whoever else is trying to stream here on the Thursday afternoon. Anyway, back. So we're talking about Tango, about a big flood, lots of soil that washed into that area probably from the creek just to the north of us, which is I don't remember. Little tiny creek, just a dribble most of the time.
Yeah. And it swelled this flood, as will happen. And when they came back the next day, where this break in the slope was for Tango, or what we now call Tango Oaks, had been totally filled in by the washout of all the rocks coming down from the slope above. So to our best estimate, I mean, it kind of varies depending where you are in the vineyard, but it sounds like in some spots there's almost 20 feet of gravel before you get to bedrock below. It's really a remarkable soil type to deal with. And, you know, in a region like the Finger Lakes where we have more than enough water, as that story is evidence of, to have a vineyard with that great of air or of water drainage just naturally part of it makes growing the grapes and making the wine that much easier.
So Heather.
Yes.
How are you enjoying this wine?
Well, what I really love about the 13 Tango Oaks Riesling is the fact that it's a pretty understated Riesling. It's a single vineyard. It has a lot of layers to it, but it's not a Riesling that hits you in the face. Sometimes like our straight up dry Rieslings do. It lets you know that it's ready to have some fun. This is a wine that's elegant, nicely layered. It has a great long finish, perfect for your front porch, maybe some cheese, or just by the glass like right now.
So Rebecca, you've been pretty quiet down there in the right-hand corner.
Yeah. Well, I'm loving this wine. The 2013 was the first vintage of this wine that I ever had. And so I think I've been enjoying this for about maybe 2 or 3 years. And I am so impressed by the way that it just continues to be so young and vibrant. It's, I think it's unusual for a lot of people to think about drinking a Riesling from 2013 and understand that wine, some people don't understand that Riesling gets better with age, and this is no exception, and it's just drinking at its zenith right now. Also, I think it's kind of cool to talk about what this property was before it became a vineyard. It was a peach orchard, wasn't it, for the Native American?
Well, it goes back a long ways. And I suspect that, William Wickham came to Hector in, I believe, 1811 or somewhere around there, and started his farm. And before he was here, other people were undoubtedly taking advantage of this exquisite microclimate, but they were asked to leave. And it's ever since then, it's been a fruit farm of various fruits, peaches, cherries, and I think later on grapes. The Wickham family had pretty extensive plantings through the 1900s up through the 70s or 80s, and they started the winery here in 1981. It was a really different time in 1981 for the Finger Lakes wine industry. Of course, the vineyards were just developing. Vinifera wines were just coming on the scene. Constantine Franck had probably planted the first vinifera in the Finger Lakes only in the 70s, or maybe a little bit before, but mainly experimental. Then Gold Seal got on board with some larger experimental plantings here in Seneca Lake in the early 70s, up where Stone Vineyard is, and or near there. And then it wasn't until the late 80s or late 70s, early 80s that people really started concentrating on vinifera, and it was mostly Chardonnay and Riesling at the time. In any case, the Wickham started the winery. The market was really tough, and it was not a good time for the economy either. Prime interest rates were in the double digits certainly when they started, and they didn't make it. They went under later in the 80s, and and actually lost the farm, and was really a tragic farming story. But Fred, who owns Tango Oaks, went off to Washington, D.C. to continue a career as a graphic arts designer, and later, sometime later, came back to Hector and bought back a piece of a big chunk of the original Wickham land grant farm, and that's where Tango Oaks is today.
Great story.
Yeah.
Well, and there's another part of this story that brings all of it full circle. And not just the fact that one of the original founding farms from the turn of the 19th century and a little bit after that, not only did they become grape growers, not only did they survive, prohibition through the 50s, through the 60s, into the 70s with a change, they opened a winery. They lost part of the farm because they lost the winery. They get it back. But who'd like to have the story of telling us what happens in 2016 with this wine?
Well, I'm happy to.
All right, go ahead, go.
I don't know that I remember it all that well because it happened in the middle of harvest.
It was in September.
Yeah, we had sent off. We'd sent this wine off, this very particular one off to the Canberra International Riesling Challenge, which is a major, Riesling. People love tasting everyone else's Rieslings, so it's one of the major Riesling competitions in the world that people send wine in from all over the place. And we had sent it off some number of months before. There's obviously some lead time to get to Australia. It's a bit of a delay. And if I'm being honest, I totally forgot about it. Forgot we'd sent the wine. I think it was the first time we'd submitted a wine to the competition. We wanted to support the Finger Lakes and support New York Riesling in that competition, but didn't necessarily think much more of it. And I got a text message from Fred Wickham congratulating me. In the middle of, we're out in the crush pad, and I was like, "What?" I'd send him back. I'm like, because we hadn't picked any fruit from him or anything yet. And what are you talking about? And he sent me the link that this 13 vintage of the Tango Oaks had been selected as best North American Riesling at this competition, which was a huge feather in our caps. I mean, we love it. We love that this wine showed so well. It was a real, the amount of it we bottled was a bit of a gamble to really double down on what we thought the quality of this wine was. And to see it rewarded like that is just hard to top. And then we quickly got back to work. And then I think everyone came downstairs for a little like toast and cheers at like 6 p.m. There's a really cute photo of all of us in like the evening sunlight. Our friend Thomas Pastuzak was there, the sommelier. Julia was there, my spouse. We had a kind of a goofy crew sitting out on the pad drinking Tango Oaks 13. And then I think we clapped our hands and started cleaning up.
That does sound about right. Yeah. There was one other thing about Tango that I think we forgot to mention that is, I think, really quite unique about it is that it is the only Alsatian clone vineyard that we work with at Red Newt. Even if you had gone into the vineyard and, walked a couple of rows of Riesling, you could really start to actually tell there's a big difference. The grapes look different. The clusters are a little bit more loose. The berries are a little bit small. And they've got, when they get to ripeness, they really do turn this beautiful golden color. And it's definitely unique to that site.
I also like the fact that when we talk about Tango Oaks, we're not talking about a single pick of fruit. I mean, we have quite a lot of different things that we do with the fruit from this vineyard. So this particular single vineyard bottle of Riesling is just one small portion of what we actually do with that vineyard. Dave or Kelby, do you want to let people in on some of the secrets of what comes out of the Tango vineyard that a lot of people haven't seen yet?
I mean, I joke that as a serious Riesling producer, you can't help yourself but to want to make every style of Riesling possible. It's almost the curse of being a Riesling maker is that you just love the grape and love all the expressions of it. So, we've fallen victim to that same problem here. We obviously love making a bunch of different Rieslings, but from Tango Oaks, we've started in 2015. We started doing an early pick for Sect, the sparkling wine made in the traditional champagne method, which means that it was picked early, fermented, bone dry, and then put into bottle with a little bit of sugar and another yeast culture to re-ferment and bottle. And we've been doing that every year, which might surprise some people because you haven't ever seen this wine or heard of it, because it's a long process to do it well. Sometimes you can get a sparkling wine out to market quickly, but the traditional method involves quite a bit of time aging it in the bottle on that second ferment, the yeast and the pressure. So that's what we've been working on. And that 15 vintage, we're just starting to think about maybe getting ready to release. So that's a real treat. The other thing that you probably have seen or heard about that we make from it, we do some dessert wine styles. Again, you can't make Riesling unless you like making dessert wines. So we've done some what we call Noble Select, which is a late pick with quite a bit of botrytis in it, which we consider similar to Baron Auslese, if you know the German classification system, and if you don't worry about it. We've done Auslese, or what we would call Auslese, which is just Noble, which is no real botrytis, but really late picked, really ripe grapes, really intense flavors. We've done that both as a sweeter style and as a dry style, which is pretty cool. And perhaps to Meg's dismay, we've also done ice wine 2 times. And those are, the Noble Select and I think the Noble Dry now are both available. You can find those. But the ice wines are not quite there yet, although we hope the ice wines and the Sect will be maybe out there by this fall for everyone.
I think it's really great to see that we've taken just a small 5-acre chunk of land and working so closely with the owners, been able to create such a diversity of products from just one block. Because a lot of times when people are thinking about wine in general, they say, oh, single vineyard, okay, so you just take all the fruit, you harvest it all at once, machine pick or not, and then just, dump it in and make the wine and then slap a single vineyard, label on it and off it goes to market. But a lot of times, especially for us at Red Newt, I think it's really special that we take the time to look at that land, to look at the property, to look at what it's producing and see how many different variations and how many different potential things we can do with a fruit from that block. And I think that's something that's really unique to the Finger Lakes and especially to this particular property.
Yeah, I think that's a really important sort of point that I'd like to make about single vineyard wines, especially in particular how we approach these wines. We launched our reserve label, our white label wines back in 2001, I believe, or thereabouts, with our first reserve Riesling, which was essentially Sawmill Creek. That was almost our only Riesling producer or vineyard for quite a while. And we've always, with all of our production, still do pretty much every single block of fruit that we bring in, every picking, every not every press load, but fractioning, it all pretty much stays separate until very late in the process. And back in 2009, we were working with 3 different vineyards which were very distinct: the Tango Oaks and the Davis Vineyard and the Bullhorn Creek Vineyard. And we decided, well, we're going to keep these separate, and we have to call them something. So we said, well, let's just call them the name of the vineyard. And, you know, at least in this neck of the woods, single vineyard designated wines, that kind of practice hadn't really become very popular. So we were kind of out front, but it wasn't because we were looking for marketing cachet. We were just wanted to have a way to communicate to people of where they came from and kind of what to expect, how to connect with the personality of that site when it comes across in the glass. And that's what we do today still. It's not about globbing onto the market. It's about just making a connection with the place.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite wines to come out of Tango Oaks Vineyard is the 2017 Noble Dry. I've never had a wine like that before that is late harvest and finishes dry. And I'm curious where you got what was your motivation, and did you have a wine like that elsewhere that you were inspired by to create this wine?
Yeah, I mean, it is a style that exists in Germany and has probably for the last 30 or so years. The pioneer of it is a producer called J.B. Becker in the Rheingau. And he started doing it, I think, in the late 70s, this Ausschlese Trocken. And they're pretty demanding wines in every possible way. They're demanding on the palate, right? Like they're not an easy sipping wine, right? They're kind of baffling in the different ways they work in the weight of the wine. And they're really tough to make in the winery to make sure they're balanced. But you will see German examples of them. They tend to be very specific to a vintage and kind of showpiece wines. And you know, the 17 was the first time we ever made it here, and it was the right vintage to do it. We hung the fruit really long, and we never got botrytis, so we never got that noble rot that we'd normally expect for a late harvest wine. But we had this beautiful, really intense, rich fruit, and we kept some of it as a regular noble style, so kept sugar in it to lower alcohol. And we had one 500-liter puncheon of older French oak that we just let it ferment and ferment. It took about 1.5 years, and it got down to this dry level. And actually, as you mentioned it, the thing I will, and Megs, did you try it? The thing I'll do before I walk out of here shortly will be try the 19 version, which is coming into its finish line a little bit faster than the 17 did.
Yeah. And you know, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, Rebecca, because I had actually just right before we had made this wine, I had actually had this J.B. Becker Ausschlese Trocken style, and I had said to Kelby, I was like, you know, I really like this wine. Do you think we could make something in that style? And of course, Kelby's like 10 steps ahead of me. He's like, yeah, that's already on the docket for this year. So
that's great. It's such a unique wine. I love that wine.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to taste it a little bit down the road. We do have a couple of questions that have come up from people who are watching. The first actually came from very nearby at Sunset View Creamery. They say they love the Tango Oaks. They love it with cheese of any kind. So if you're contemplating sitting out in the sunshine on your porch, pull it up with some Finger Lakes cheddar, maybe a little bit of aged cheddar, maybe some that's just really nice and mild. So it's got some great, you know, creaminess to it. The other question that we were asked is, do we work with all of our farms that we pull fruit from, are they neighbors that we work closely with, or do we work any of our own grapes in vineyards?
Yeah, well, I think that I'm going to start this, and then maybe Kelby or Megs will finish it. But we when we bought this property with a winery on it, we bought the winery and the restaurant and a 5-acre plot of land, which is how it got divvied up after the Wickham property was split up, you know, many years ago. And that's an actually property line in the back of the winery went right down the center of the parking lot. It was really just a little postage stamp plot for an operation like this. Then just a couple of years ago, the property around the winery came up for sale. So we bought an additional 20 acres of vineyard above and below the winery. The vineyards above the winery are a mature producing Concord vineyard. The vineyards below the winery had been abandoned, about the time when we started. So about 20 years, had been abandoned for about 20 years and was totally overgrown. There were, I don't know, how big were those locust trees? Maybe 40, 50 feet tall. They're, mature locust trees all through the vineyard and wire. Anyway, that's cleared off now. So when you come to visit, you'll see just a cover crop in that vineyard. So we're not using that fruit for the winery. So yes, all the grapes that we make wine from are from just a handful of growers, and we have really close relationships and ongoing relationships with these growers that I think Kelby is going to give us some insight into.
Yeah, I mean, with both Tango and then thinking of Riesling in particular, Tango and Lahoma are two Riesling sites at this point. We work incredibly closely with those two growers, really kind of to craft what we're aiming for in the vineyard, and which relates to what we want in the bottle. And it's a bit of a, sometimes it's a little bit of cajoling to get them to come around to what we're looking for. And then with both Tango and Lahoma, once we get closer into harvest, Megs and myself and our cellar team will get out and do a lot of work personally in those vines to kind of drop fruit that we don't want there, just kind of tidy things up in a real detailed way that lets us hang the fruit as long as we want, or allows us to make the styles that we want to make. So it's a real great partnership in that regard.
Those were the questions that we had so far today. And of course, the next question was, any ideas what else to have this with besides cheese?
I hear your inspiration, Dave.
Just thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, and what I think I actually had some of this wine with it. What I'm going to have for dinner tonight is probably some reinvention of what we had last night, which was coq au vin, which Susan made.
Oh, nice.
This dry Riesling, this Riesling in particular, was just beautiful. Actually, we had this, I certainly let on how many different Rieslings we had. I mean, just a glass or two of each, I'm sure. But this, and also the Kelly James Russell 2014 we had last night, which was really just delectable. It's lean and crisp, and with a sort of rich unctuousness of the coq au vin was really delicious. So yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to do to make it a little bit different tonight, but that's the base of my thought at the moment.
I did a sort of marinade of some leftover chicken tenders I had from a dish I did the other day. So knowing me, that's going to get done with maybe a little bit of panko coating in the oven. And then we'll do some green beans or some broccoli, like in a light stir fry. Maybe hit that with a little bit of olive oil and some more springtime herbs. Depends on what's left in from last fall's harvest as to what I get to use. Because the new plants haven't grown yet. So.
Well, if you need chai, Souther, my yard's definitely going right now. So let me know.
At our house, so.
Yeah, I will say that I do not have any inspiration yet for dinner tonight, but I do plan on maybe tasting one more glass of this Tango and seeing if some inspiration strikes me.
Maybe something coconut and curry-like?
I do have all of the above ingredients, actually, so possibly.
Mm-hmm. Like a sort of a yellow curry or green curry, a little bit spicy.
Curry would be really nice with this. How do you think it would go with bolognese? Do you think it has the acidity to hold up?
Well,
Probably does. It wouldn't be my first choice.
I think I'm going to use the Kelby James, the Glacial Ridge Pinot Noir for my bolognese instead, and then I'm going to save this for tomorrow night. And I love the idea of curry.
I think that's a good call.
Yeah.
Kelly, how about you? Any inspiration yet for dinner?
I'm going to make a Japanese chicken recipe this evening, with kind of browned and chopped up chicken thigh with kind of like a light egg omelet around it that you have on top of rice. So, which sounds super complicated, but is actually pretty easy to make. It's a New York Times cooking recipe that I've probably made half a dozen times in the last year. It's a go-to.
Well, thank you, everyone out there on the end of the Zoom stream. Thank you, Kelby and Megs and Rebecca and Heather. And here's to another day of happiness, health, and Riesling. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.